You might just look at a photograph of Arborea and think, oh, whoa, there's a lot going on here. And you wouldn't be wrong, there's a lot going on in this board game, but in this video, I can teach the entire game in about 10 minutes. I'll give you reasons for and against the game, and we'll summarize its profile in terms of its design, its artistry, engagement, strategy, and complexity. This is Arborea. At first glance, it can seem pretty overwhelming, so to teach this game, we're going to start by narrowing our focus to a very simple example turn. There are 4 steps. Step 1, I can decide to advance a pilgrimage track or place a villager. Advancing a track only makes sense after a villager is placed, so we'll do that. There are 4 locations to choose from, but don't worry about what they do just yet. I'll place my villager on this one and receive a special bonus, which is an increase on this track. I don't want to get diverted into explaining what this means yet, but later in this explanation, you'll understand the significance of this bonus. You'll notice I can pay a price to repeat this action, which I will not do. In step 2, you might expect that I would use the villager I just placed, but actually, when activating a villager, you can only activate one that has been removed from a track on a previous turn. So let's activate him now. Activation means moving the villager down the trail and activating all icons. At this time, we're going to look at a few elements of the game in greater detail. First, I attract a mush frog. Arborea is about regenerating the environment and repopulating it with fantastic creatures. However, unlike most games where components are taken from a supply, players must first create a supply by attracting the creatures. This mush frog will be added to the board, I'll earn the bonus, and now this mush frog is available for any player to add to their own environment. Attracting animals also advances the sun marker. This is how we'll identify when the game is over. I've set up a 3-player game, so we are approximately halfway done. Next, I'm going to regenerate a biome. In this case, it is the green resource, and it's going to happen twice along this trail. Let's look at the biome reserve. Just like the supply of creatures are shared by all players, the biomes represent shared resources. So to generate the green resource, I simply increase the top marker. I'll show you what the bottom marker does in just a minute. Last, I'll earn sage rewards. I can receive a reward if I've given a gift to the sage, and every track has its own sage. As you can see by this marker, I've given 1 gift, so I'll earn 1 reward. Had I given 2 or 3 gifts, I would earn just as many rewards, but they must all be different. This icon represents inviting a creature. Since I just attracted that mush frog, let's choose him. I'll get a bonus for doing this, and I'll add it to my invited creatures area. I'd like to point out something else. There's another bonus here that might be a better move for me, but I don't want to explain it just yet. Just make note of this space, and later when I explain more about strategy, we can understand why this might be a better move. Once I've reached the end of my pilgrimage, my worker is returned to my player board. There are actually 3 types of villagers in Arborea: young, veterans, and elders. The difference between the 3 types will be made clear as I finish this turn. The bottom of my board is for workers who are available to be used. One difference between workers is that the young and the veterans, the smaller workers, need to be trained before they're readied. By contrast, elders are always ready. This worker is a veteran, so it'll go back here until it is readied again. That is 1 activated villager. As you can see by the player aid, I can activate up to 2 villagers and pay a price to activate a 3rd, but I choose not to. In step 3, I can complete an ecosystem card. Ecosystem cards are in a common supply like the creatures. I haven't shown you the action that's used to draft these cards, but earlier in the game I drafted this card. I can complete it if I spend the biome resources. I'm going to need more of the green and red resources to do this, or I could use water, which serves as a wild, but in any case, the needed resources aren't available, so I can't do this now. In step 4, this is the last step and doesn't involve any choices. Rather, this is more like a cleanup phase. The first step is to update the biome reserve. Remember the green resource I generated earlier? I didn't end up using that resource, so as compensation for my contribution to the environment, I'll receive victory points. That's what this bottom marker is for. I receive the indicated points for each resource, in this case, 6 points. It's now time to advance tracks. There's 2 things to be aware of. First, tracks advance a different amount based on the type of worker. Simply said, veterans or white workers are the only workers that advance twice. The 2 tracks that have my workers on them aren't veterans though, so these tracks will advance 1 space. The second thing you must know is that the advancement of a track is the only time a worker can hop off onto a trailhead. This decision is made in the order of the players on the track. So on this track, I will stay, but blue will jump off. In this track, red will stay and I will also stay. The advantage of staying is that later trails will provide more events than closer trails, so at this point the complexity of the board should become more clear. The reason the board is so busy is because each track leads to two sides, and each side has multiple trailheads. The differences between these trailheads aren't really that complicated. For example, if you compare the trail that I used on this turn with the next one, the only difference is that I would have attracted a Grimster instead of a Mushfrog and generated an extra resource. My turn is now done. However, while other players take their turns, I must place any completed ecosystem cards and invited creatures. I'm allowed to do this now because, generally speaking, nothing that an opponent does should influence me, and neither will my choice influence them. This is a good time to talk about scoring. You've already seen that I was able to earn 6 points by generating the green resource and leaving it available to other players. Another major scoring mechanic is the placement of creatures. My player aid shows me how all the creatures are scored. Generally, you can earn more points by placing creatures adjacent to biomes of their matching color, but it's also important to note that some creatures score by being in the same row or column as other creatures. The Mushfrog is simple, 3 points per pink resource, so this placement is worth 6 points. It's worth instructing you on some of the restrictions. I can't place the Mushfrog if it isn't completely surrounded by a biome, so this is illegal. However, a creature is not required to be in a position that has its specified resource, so had this been the situation, it would have been a legal move, just not worth any points. A creature can't be directly adjacent to another creature, which is why I put my Mushfrog here and not here. Though I don't have a completed ecosystem card to place right now, I'd also like to point out that an ecosystem card can be placed anywhere in this grid, even overlapping other cards and even partially underlying a creature. So, as an example, if on a later turn I was placing this card, I would be allowed to place it under the Mushfrog, and therefore increase its point value. Now, while we prepare for the next turn, let's look at the game elements we haven't seen yet. This is the Spirit track. Spirit is the resource that gets spent to perform extra actions. It gets replenished by attracting animals and building environment cards. It'll also cause you to lose or gain points at the end of the game. Let's look at all the actions now. The two tracks at the bottom of the board are very similar. Both tracks generate resources and both tracks attract creatures. They differ only in the type and sage bonuses. The track in the top left corner is the most effective way to train your villagers and invite creatures. This action is one way to give a gift to a sage. This action allows you to place another villager on the same turn. Usually, you have to pay spirit points to place a second villager, so doing it for free can be pretty powerful. The upper right track is where you can take cards from the display or generate the water biome. It also has another action for placing a free villager or giving a gift. Finally, let's talk about endgame scoring. You already saw how you can score points during the game by generating resources. You also saw how creatures score at the end of the game. These two mechanics are a constant in every game, but the one I'm about to show you is variable. At setup, 4 tokens are dealt at the top of these tracks. These are multipliers for various objectives you can pursue. In this game, the objectives are barren biomes, sage gifts, water biomes, and mushfrogs and antlerworms. If you look at my player board, I already have 4 barren biomes, and I can probably build more before the game is over. Remember the bonus I didn't take earlier? If I had taken this bonus instead of the mushfrog, I could have further increased my multiplier for at least 4 more endgame points. So maybe I didn't need that mushfrog so badly. Now let's look at our next turn in the game to better understand strategy. At the end of the blue player's turn, this track is advancing. Red is getting off, but I'm in no rush, so again, I will stay. It's Red's turn next. Now it's my turn again, and the state of the board has changed a little bit, so it can be helpful by considering the available biomes. There's 2 red coral, 1 green weed, and a blue water. If I use the water as a green, then I would only need 1 more red and 1 more green to finish this card. I could pull it off like this. I could place a villager on this track, pay 3 spirit to advance the track, and immediately hop off. I could then generate 1 weed and use my sage reward to generate 1 red. This would work, but I think it's short-sighted. I have a better idea. I'm going to go here and move up on the yellow track as a bonus. I'm going to pay the spirit to advance the track, and then I'm going to hop off with both villagers. For the activation phase, I'll activate this villager first. I can give a gift to any sage, but I'm going to choose this sage below. I'll then invite 2 creatures, and for my sage bonus, I'm going to place another villager on this track. Of course, now I'm going to move up on the red track, which, by the way, vindicates the mush frog I took earlier. Activating the second villager, I'll train one young, and for my sage reward, I'll take this ecosystem card. Now, I'll use 2 pink and 1 blue to complete this card. The bonus is a trained veteran and a spirit point. For the last step, I have no biomes to resolve, but this track will advance twice as I have 2 villagers, each worth 1 step. And yes, once again, I'm going to stay on. Having concluded my turn, I'll add this card and both creatures. And later in the game, when this card is completed, should I wish to, I could place it underneath this creature to increase its point value. Here are what I see as a few pros about Arborea. 1, I love that every person's turn provides every other player a chance to make a decision, whether they want to hop off those tracks as they move. Secondly, I love that the game motivates you to pay attention to what people are doing, because if you can predict which track they'll use, you can also get an idea of which tracks will advance faster, and that informs your own decision making. I love that. Third, this is a game that rewards you for planning and resourcefulness. Again, it comes back to those time tracks. Something you do several turns earlier is going to pay off down the line. Fourth, this game oozes strategic twists and turns. You can start the game thinking that you're going to be focusing on one column of scoring and maybe one strategy, but as the game is played and as you see how your opponents are playing, you need to stay flexible. And then finally, while the game has so much going on, so much that may seem like a distraction, I find that as I play it more and more, I'm learning to see through the fog and identify those things worth focusing on. And that, especially for me, is the attractive quality of this game. This is a very difficult game to master, and every time I play it, I'm enjoying getting better at it. And then for the cons, despite what I called attractive about the game, it is undeniably overwhelming. There are so many mechanics. Let's see if we can count them. So you've got time tracks, different worker types, shared resources, the question of do you take resources or do you use them for victory points? You've got card drafting for the ecosystem cards. You've got victory point multiplier tracks and variable scoring. There's card and tile placement, and then on top of that, you've got creature placement. There's sage gifts, which are essentially upgrading an action. Which actions do you want to upgrade? And then after you've upgraded the actions, you still have the choice of which reward do you take every time you take that action. And then finally, you always have to ask yourself, do you want to pay spirit in order to perform an extra action? So that's 11 mechanics, and all of these decisions are non-trivial. Whether or not you're going to like this game is really going to depend heavily on how you can handle so much going on. This is a point salad game. The score markers go up to 399 points. So what that means is that essentially there's so many ways to make points that points kind of start to lose their value a little bit. It's like, well, it's just points everywhere. And then thematically, I call this game A's and B's, which is that all of the resources that you're trading is pretty meaningless. I mean, it's so abstract. So I call that A's and B's. And then finally, this is the only complaint about the game that actually bothers me. Everything else I'm willing to overlook. But there's very little luck in this game. There's no dice rolling to resolve anything. The only thing in the entire game that involves an element of luck is that ecosystem card draw. And before you take cards, you have the option of refreshing all of those decks. Whenever you have a game that takes this much effort to play, to have a decision that boils down to luck is a disappointment for me. You know, you could refresh it and you get like the best card ever. And it's not because you did any planning at all. You just got lucky. I don't like that. So to summarize, let's look at this game's profile, starting with the game's design. What is the experience of this game designed to be about? I think this is a very mechanically driven game. The one element of theme that I think comes out very clearly in gameplay is that of everything being shared. You really are working in an environment here because the resources that get generated are for everybody. I'd say that this game, because of that time track being advanced by your opponents, it has a moderate degree of interaction. There is some potential for you to have some table talk and try to compel one of your opponents to join you on a track. Like, hey, get on this track because if we advance it, maybe it'd be good for you and me. But In practice, what I find is that rather than talking with my opponents about what I think they should do, I kind of just get bogged down on planning my own turn. For artistry, I'd like to point out that this is the Kickstarter edition of the game. With the Kickstarter, there are a few wooden components that are included only in this edition. The sun markers and the player markers have custom design printed on them, whereas in the retail edition, it's just going to be little wooden tokens without any design on that. However, with Alley Cat Games, their Kickstarter editions don't have as much premium components. It's more about expansions, mini expansions that are included in the game, which I did not show in this video. You saw most of what just the base game looks like, so what you see for the most part is going to look like what the retail edition looks like. I think it's a beautiful world that they've created in this colorful track. Some people might say that it's distracting, that there's too much going on. It's not focused enough on, what you're supposed to do. Rather, there's all this kind of decorative trails. I think it's really quite beautiful, especially when you get accustomed to interpreting how to read that board. And then for strategy and complexity, this game is way over on the far extreme. The only thing that it scores higher on in strategy is probably complexity, and that's only because I really, really hate the card refresh. I think that adds an unnecessary element of luck, but absolutely going to be a heavy, heavy game for you. At the end of the day, I personally love this game because I'm a big fan of heavy games that have a degree of interaction still. My only obstacle with games like this is that it can be difficult to get it on the table because it's a challenging game to learn and play. You've got to find the right group for this game. That is my review of Arborea. Thank you for watching this video, and a special thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel. If you would like to be involved in the conversation on Discord, talking about the games, what's coming up, and my opinion on games, even games that I don't review on the YouTube channel, you should consider becoming a Patreon member. Of course, there are links in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.